I suppose most people, when they look at me now, see nothing more than an old woman in a quiet house. My neighbors wave politely. My daughter calls every Sunday. The nurses bring soup and smile kindly as they leave. The world, it seems, has moved on, and it believes I did too. But behind these wrinkled hands and fading eyes, there's a story I never told, a story I buried so deeply that even I questioned whether it ever really happened. The silence became my comfort, my safety, my prison. You see, they all believed the story my husband told, that I had run off in the night, unstable, hysterical, that I had left my daughter behind, that I'd abandoned my family because I couldn't handle the stress of being a wife and mother. But I never ran. I never even made it past the front door. My name is Margaret, and more than 50 years ago, I vanished. But I was still there, inside the very home they thought I had left, trapped beneath it, forgotten. I can still remember the smell of the wood in that basement, damp, moldy, heavy. It clung to my skin, to my breath, to my bones. I counted days by scratching faint lines into the bricks. I whispered songs to myself just to remember what my voice sounded like. For 2 years, I lived in darkness. I learned to listen to footsteps above me. The heavy ones meant he was home. The light ones, those were hers, my daughter. She was just a baby when I disappeared. I could hear her playing in the room above me. I could hear her crying when she was sick. And sometimes, in the rarest of moments, I would hear her laugh, and it would split me in two. They told her I had died, that I had a breakdown, that I had left her. But the truth is, I never stopped being her mother, even when I was nothing more than a ghost in my own home. I don't know why I'm telling this now. Maybe it's the way the light falls on the floorboards in the morning, the way it used to when I was young. Maybe it's the ache in my chest that grows stronger each year. Or maybe, just maybe, it's because someone finally found the diary I left behind. The one I wrote with stolen scraps of paper. The one I hid behind the crumbling brick near the furnace. The one that still smelled faintly of blood, sweat, and fear. My daughter found it. And in doing so, she found me. For years, I tried to forget, to move forward. But the past, it has teeth, and lately I've been hearing it growl again. So I'm going to tell you everything. Not because I want pity, not because I seek justice, but because I want the silence to end, once and for all. This is the story of how I disappeared without ever leaving, of how love can become a weapon, of how a husband became a warden, and of how, after 2 long years in the dark, a little girl saved me with nothing but hope, and a key made of paper. Everyone believed the lie, but I lived it, and I remember every second. I met Henry when I was barely 20. He was tall, well-spoken, and came from a family that owned half the shops on our street. My father called him a man with ambition. My mother whispered that I was lucky. In those days, a man who wore a suit and opened doors was considered a blessing. But blessings can curdle into curses when no one's watching. We were married in the fall of 1963. I wore my sister's hand-stitched dress, and the reception was held in Henry's family garden. He smiled the whole time, said all the right things to all the right people. And when we danced under the lanterns, I felt like the world had finally opened up to me. I thought I had found a forever kind of love. The house he bought for us was on the edge of town, a 2-story cottage with ivy-covered walls, a creaking gate, and a cellar door I was told never to open. "It's just storage," he'd said, brushing off my curiosity. "Nothing you need to worry about." At first he was kind, not warm, but kind. I mistook his coldness for strength. When I'd speak too much, he'd place a finger to his lips, and I'd smile and grow quiet. When I cried once, from the loneliness that came after moving away from my family, he wrapped his arms around me in silence. I thought it meant he cared, but caring, I would learn, is not silent. The first sign came when I told him I was pregnant. He didn't smile, he didn't kiss my belly or pull me into a proud embrace. He just stared at me and said, "Are you sure it's mine?" The floor beneath me felt like it cracked open. My voice caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to hit him, to run, but I only managed to nod. "Then don't tell anyone yet," he said coldly. "Not until we're certain it survives." Those words stayed with me, like a stain that never fades. Not until we're sure you survive, but it, a thing, a condition. Still, I hoped. I prayed that once he saw our baby, something inside him would change. And when our daughter was born, our sweet, soft-eyed Helen, I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd been wrong about the man I married. But Henry only grew more distant. He never touched her, never picked her up. If she cried, he'd leave the room. When she smiled, he'd look away. I tried everything. I cooked his favorite meals. I kissed his neck when he read the paper. I left notes on his pillow, small words of love written in shaky cursive. One night, I left a Polaroid of Helen holding my finger with her tiny hand. I wrote, "She knows who her father is. Do you?" He didn't say anything the next day, just threw the photo into the fireplace as he passed by. That was the first time I thought I might not be safe, but I didn't tell anyone. Not when he took the phone out of the hallway, not when he stopped letting me visit my mother, not even when he began locking the front door from the outside during the day when he left for work. "You're too tired to go out," he'd say. "You're forgetful. Best to keep you inside." And maybe some part of me believed it, because by then I had become a ghost, a hollow woman in a quiet house. I only existed through Helen. Her giggles, her tiny fingers on my face, the way she nestled into my chest like I was the whole world. But a mother's joy can't hide a woman's fear. One morning, I woke up to find all the mirrors gone, every single one. From the hallway, the bathroom, the bedroom. I stood there with my hands pressed to my face, trying to remember what I looked like. Later that week, I opened the cupboard to find my journals missing. "My thoughts aren't safe?" I asked him. "You don't need to think so much," he replied. "It only causes trouble." And then came the night of the storm. The rain slammed against the windows like fists. Helen had a fever, and I held her against my chest as her skin burned under my touch. I called for Henry, begged him to help. He stood in the doorway and stared. "You did this," he said. "She needs a doctor. She needs a better mother." And then something snapped. He walked forward, yanked Helen from my arms, and handed her to the nanny. Then without a word, he grabbed my wrist and dragged me down the hallway. I screamed. I begged. I kicked at the walls. He said nothing. He opened the cellar door I was never allowed to touch, the one that led beneath the house. I fought harder. He hit me once, open-handed across the face. The sound was louder than I imagined. A crack against bone and skin. I tasted blood. Then he shoved me down the wooden stairs. I landed hard. My ankle twisted. My head hit something cold and wet. Before I could stand, he closed the door. The lock clicked, and that's when I knew. I wasn't going anywhere. The dark was alive. It creaked and breathed with the shifting of the house above me. The wooden beams groaned like old lungs. Rats scurried in corners. I couldn't tell where the dampness ended and my sweat began. The cold was different down there. Not just temperature, but a kind of chill that crawled beneath the skin, whispering that this place had forgotten sunlight, and would forget me, too. I screamed that first night, until my throat tore. I called for Helen, over and over. I screamed her name like it was a prayer, like she might hear it and pull me back to her. I pounded on the ceiling. I kicked the door until my foot swelled, until my ankle pulsed with pain that made me dizzy, but no one came. No one ever came. There was a bulb hanging from the ceiling by a single wire, and sometimes it flickered on. I don't know how it worked. Maybe he flipped a switch upstairs. Maybe he controlled it to remind me that he still existed and that he could turn the light off any time he wanted. There was a cot, a rusty bucket, a shelf with old newspapers, and a cracked ceramic bowl where he left my food once a day. Thin soup, bread so stale it scraped my throat, water that tasted like metal. I didn't see my daughter again, Not for a very long time. The days bled into each other. Time became a fog. I tried to track it at first. I scratched marks into the bricks, counting mornings by the food and nights by the dark. I whispered the days of the week aloud so I wouldn't forget them. But after a while, even those habits faded. Survival stripped me bare. I became a creature. I sang lullabies to the silence. I held my own hands when the panic crept in. I imagined Helen's voice as I rocked myself to sleep, pretending she was with me, just beyond the door. And then one day, I started writing. There were scraps of paper left on the shelves, old receipts, yellowed envelopes, bits of packaging from a time before the basement had become my cage. I found a stub of charcoal from a burnt piece of wood. It was small and rough, but it worked. I wrote letters to my daughter, long, desperate, trembling letters. Helen, my love, Mama is here. I never left. I'm still with you. Please, please don't forget me. I wrote until my fingers bled, until I ran out of space. Then I tore away a loose brick near the furnace and hid the pages behind it. It became my ritual, my resistance. Every word was a protest against the silence he had forced on me. Sometimes I could hear the world above, voices, footsteps, laughter even. The sound of Helen's shoes running down the hallway. A birthday party once. I could tell by the clapping and music, muffled as it was through layers of floorboards and dirt. Each sound felt like a knife, not because they were distant, but because they were right there. So close I could almost reach them. He never spoke to me, not once. He'd open the door just a crack, slide in food, then close it again. If I tried to speak, he'd slam it shut. I stopped trying. Weeks passed, months. I lost weight. My hair began to fall out in clumps. My gums bled, but I never stopped writing. And one night, I broke. I remember sitting on the floor, knees to my chest, my back against the wall. I was shaking, my vision blurred. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. He'd forgotten, or maybe decided not to feed me. I thought I was going to die there, alone, unseen. And for a moment, I wanted to. I let my head fall back, eyes closing. But then, I heard something, a voice, small, high, muffled. A girl's voice. It was her, Helen. She was humming, a soft tune, something I used to sing to her when she was an infant. I hadn't heard it in years, but she remembered. She remembered. I pressed my ear to the ceiling and wept. That was the moment I promised myself I would survive. Not for me, for her. She didn't know I was still here, but something in her heart remembered the sound. That song had carried through the wood and the dust and the years. She hadn't forgotten, and neither would I. So I kept writing. Page after page, I poured everything into those letters. I told her who I was, who I had been. I wrote about the night I disappeared, what her father had done. I wrote about the kind of mother I wanted to be. And I waited. Every day I told myself, one day she'll find this. One day she'll know, and maybe, just maybe, she'll come back for me. I don't remember the exact day I stopped hoping someone would open that door for the right reason. It happened slowly, like everything else down there. Time softened my screams into whispers. Pain dulled into background noise. And hope, the kind that makes you fight and scratch and shout, turned into something quieter. I didn't want to die, but I stopped expecting to be saved. I was 24 years old, a mother, a prisoner. And in some twisted way, I had started to believe I deserved it. That's what fear does to you. Real, bone-deep fear. It reshapes your mind. You begin to doubt every memory. Was he always this cruel? Did I provoke him? Was it my fault for marrying a man I barely knew? Was I a bad wife? A bad mother? That last question haunted me the most, because every night as I lay on the thin mattress, hugging my knees to my chest, I would think of Helen, my little girl, the one I used to rock to sleep in a pale green chair, the one I taught to hum before she learned to speak, the one I carried inside me, bone of my bone, heart of my heart. Where was she now? Who was raising her? Did she call someone else Mama? Did she think I was dead? What was Henry telling her? He was always good at playing the victim, charming in public, soft-spoken around others. That was the most terrifying part. He didn't need fists to break someone. He used silence like a blade. I imagined the lies. Your mother had to go away. She was sick. She ran off with another man. She left us. Maybe he even cried when he said it. Maybe he held her while he spoke those words. Maybe she believed them. The thought hollowed me out in a way no hunger ever could. There were times when the world above me went quiet. No music, no voices, no clattering of shoes. Those days scared me more than any storm, because silence meant change. Something had shifted. Someone had left, or someone had arrived. Once I heard Henry yelling, not at me, at someone else. A woman's voice, sharp, angry. It could have been a housekeeper, a relative, maybe someone from church. The words were muffled, but I caught fragments. She was unstable. What do you expect me to do? Not safe around the child. And then the front door slammed. After that, it was quieter than usual for weeks. The food came less often. The bulb overhead didn't flicker on for days at a time. My body started to fail me. I couldn't stand without shaking. My mouth bled from the corners. I was dying, slowly, like he wanted. And yet, I wrote. Every scrap I found, I used. I even began writing on the back of old soup labels, smoothing them flat with trembling hands. I didn't know if Helen would ever find them. I didn't even know if she was still in the house. But I had to try. It was all I had left. That's when I began hiding more than just paper. I took anything he left by mistake, a cracked spoon, a bent fork, a sliver of glass, and hid them behind the same brick. Not for escape. I never thought I'd escape, but they were mine. Proof that I had existed, that I had resisted. Sometimes I'd press my ear to the wall and talk to her, just in case she could hear. Sweetheart, I love you. I never left. I'm here. Your lullaby is still in my head. You look like me, don't you? Please, Helen, please remember. I don't know how long that went on. Days became months. Months bled into a second year. My body was barely mine anymore. My skin sagged. My eyes blurred. My heart was weak. My hands always cold. But my mind stayed sharp. Every lie he ever told, every insult, every manipulation, I remembered them all, and I remembered who I used to be. Before the house, before the cellar, before Henry, I used to laugh. I used to sing while brushing my hair. I used to believe I deserved love. He took all of that from me, piece by piece, until the only part left was the one he couldn't touch, the part that knew I was still a mother, still a woman, still a person. He didn't kill me. He wanted to. He wanted to erase me without blood, to make the world forget I ever lived. But I didn't vanish. I wrote, and I waited. And then, something changed. I didn't know it at the time, but upstairs, the world was shifting. Helen was growing. She was asking questions. And Henry, the man who locked me away, was starting to lose his grip. I just didn't know how close salvation had come. Not yet. But it was coming. I didn't hear her voice again for months. The seasons changed, though I couldn't see them. I could feel it in the floorboards, how the cold lingered longer into the mornings, how the summer storms echoed louder through the walls. I imagined Helen growing taller, her hair getting longer, her questions sharpening with age. She would have been 4 by then, and I wondered, did she still believe what he told her? Did she remember my face? My smell? The way I tucked her into bed with a song only we knew? Or had time already erased me from her world? I kept writing. Every scrap I had hidden behind that loose brick was now part of a growing collection. My hands shook more, and my letters grew messier, harder to read. Some days I worried I was writing nonsense, that if anyone ever found them, they'd think I was mad. But madness would have been silence. Writing meant I still had a voice, even if no one heard it. I don't know how long I would have lasted if something hadn't shifted. if the air in that house hadn't changed. But then one night I heard music, not from the radio, not the jazz Henry used to play when he was in a good mood. This was something else. Software sweet, familiar. It was the lullaby, the one I used to hum to Helen in her crib, the same one she sang through the ceiling once, almost a year before, that had kept me alive when I was sure I would die. I pressed my ear to the ceiling, my breath caught in my throat. She was singing it again, but this time, not alone. Another voice was with her, a woman's, warm, gentle. And then I heard it, a name. Sing it for your mommy, sweetheart. Your mommy. Not past tense, not lost or gone, present. And that's when I knew. Someone new was in the house. Someone who wasn't him. The next morning, I heard drawers opening, the shuffle of boxes being moved, voices talking fast, tense, then silence, then footsteps directly above me. Slow, deliberate, like someone was searching. For what, I didn't know. But I prayed. I sat on the edge of the cot and whispered over and over, "Look behind the brick. Please, look behind the brick." And then the light turned on. Not the flickering bulb, sunlight. Blinding, warm, golden. The door opened, fully. Not the way Henry had cracked it to throw in food. This time it swung wide, and the shape in the doorway wasn't him. It was her, Helen. She was taller, yes, her face longer, her hair pulled back into a loose braid, but her eyes were still mine. We stared at each other. She didn't move. Neither did I. I must have looked like a ghost, thin, pale, broken. But she stepped forward. "Are you—" Her voice trembled. I couldn't speak. I nodded, and then she dropped to her knees and wept. Behind her, another woman appeared. Dark hair, glasses, a file clutched in one hand. A social worker, maybe, or someone from the city. She stared at me in horror. "God," she whispered. "It's true." And that's when I knew. Helen had found the diary. She had found me. The next hours passed in a blur. Hands guiding me upstairs I hadn't climbed in 2 years. Cold water pressed to my lips, blankets wrapped around my shoulders. I saw the kitchen again. Faded wallpaper, dusty counters. I saw the sun through the window and wept. Police arrived, flashing lights, questions, cameras. I didn't answer much. I couldn't. All I wanted was to hold her, and when I did, it was like my soul stitched itself back together. She didn't ask why I never came back. She already knew. She had read the pages, every one of them. Later, I learned she had been cleaning the storage room with the woman from Child Services, part of a wellness check. Someone in the community had raised concerns about her father's behavior. She had dropped a flashlight. It rolled under the shelf and knocked a brick loose. She said she found the first letter and couldn't stop reading. She recognized the handwriting. She remembered the lullaby. She said, "I knew you were real. I just didn't know how real. I hadn't been erased. I hadn't been forgotten. I had survived. Just long enough to be found." The hospital was bright. Too bright. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the smell of antiseptic stung my nose. After years in the dark, even the walls seemed to glare at me. I kept my eyes down, afraid to look too long at anything, like it might vanish if I stared too hard. The nurses whispered. They all did. They didn't know what to say to a woman who had been hidden away like a secret for 2 years. Or maybe they just didn't believe it was real. I saw it in their eyes, that mix of pity and disbelief, like I was some old folktale come to life, a ghost from a newspaper headline. Helen stayed close. She never let go of my hand, not once. She brought a brush and gently worked through the tangles in my hair. She didn't flinch when the bristles caught. She told me stories about school, the neighborhood, the books she liked, as if trying to fill in the years that had been stolen from us. She even brought me flowers. I cried over those more than anything else, not because of what they were, but because someone had given them to me without expecting anything in return. The doctors said I was severely malnourished. I had lost nearly half my body weight. My spine was curved, my eyesight blurred. They called it survivor syndrome, the way my body had adapted to darkness and fear. I called it what it was, being forgotten. They ran tests, took samples, asked questions. Everyone did. The police, the psychologists, reporters tried to sneak into the hospital. One even posed as a nurse. They all wanted the same thing: a headline, a photo, a quote. But I had no interest in being a story. I had already lived one. The diary was now in evidence. The pages I had poured myself into, those letters to my daughter, were being cataloged, fingerprinted, handled by strangers with latex gloves. Part of me hated it. They were mine. They were ours. But another part knew the truth had to be seen. My words, the ones no one had heard for 2 years, were finally loud enough to matter. Henry was arrested 3 days after my rescue. I wasn't there when they came for him, but I read about it, about how he answered the door calmly, invited the officers in like he had nothing to hide. I imagine he even smiled. He always smiled when he lied. They found more than just the diary. They found the bucket, the empty bottles, the locked door with no handle on the inside. They found my fingernails still embedded in the wooden stairs. They found what he'd tried so hard to erase. He didn't say much during the first round of questioning. He claimed I had asked to be locked away, that it was for my own good, that I was mentally unwell and had begged for isolation. The officers asked him why no medical records supported that, why there were no official reports, no prescriptions, no hospital visits, no signed documents, why our daughter had been told I was dead, why he'd hidden the existence of the basement room for years, why he'd lied to the community, to the police, to Helen. And when the lies began to crack, he fell silent, just like he always had. The trial was scheduled for months later. In the meantime, I was placed in protective housing, away from the press, away from anyone who might want to spin my pain into a story. Helen came every day. She brought puzzles, tea, an old cassette player with the lullabies I used to sing, now recorded in her voice. We'd sit on the porch in silence, just being near each other. No words, no need. She didn't ask about what happened. She didn't need to. She had read every word I wrote in that basement, and she understood me in a way no one else ever could. But there was something else, something I hadn't told her. Because while she had found the diary, while she had pieced together the puzzle of my captivity, there was a part of the truth I had kept buried even deeper, a part no one knew, not yet, and I could feel it pressing at my throat, begging to be spoken. I just didn't know if I had the strength to say it. Not after all this time, not after everything I had already lost. But something had changed in me. Sitting there in the sun, watching my daughter smile, I felt something warm bloom in my chest, a flicker of bravery, the kind I hadn't felt since before Henry took everything. And I realized then, maybe it was finally time. Maybe the truth wasn't just meant to be written. Maybe it was meant to be spoken. Out loud, to someone who mattered, to someone who remembered. I asked her to come alone. No police, no lawyer, no nurse watching from behind a glass wall. Just her and me, and a room with no mirrors. I didn't want to see myself when I told her what I was about to say. She brought tea, chamomile, my favorite, and a scarf I used to wear when I read to her. She found it in an old box in the attic. It still smelled like lavender, or maybe just memory. We sat by the window. I waited for the words to come. They didn't. Not at first. She waited with the kind of stillness only a daughter can offer. Not rushing, not coaxing, just being there, ready. Finally, I said, "There's something you don't know." Something I didn't write down. She didn't speak. She just nodded. I looked at my hands. The bones were sharper now, skin thinner, but I remembered how they used to hold her. Warm, steady, soft, with purpose. In the basement, I began, voice shaking. I wasn't always alone. She flinched, only slightly, but I saw it. I took a breath, bracing against the weight of the memory. I had a baby, I said. Helen's eyes welled, but she didn't look away. He raped me, I whispered. Not at first, but later, when no one was looking, when no one even remembered I was alive. I don't know how I said those words out loud. I had swallowed them for so long that I thought they would choke me on the way out. But once I started, I couldn't stop. I got sick. My belly swelled. I prayed it was a dream, but it wasn't. I delivered him in the dark, alone. I tore fabric from my dress to swaddle the baby. I wiped my eyes. My whole body shook. A boy, I added. He barely cried. I tried to keep him warm, to keep him safe, but he was so small, so quiet. Helen reached for my hand. Her fingers were warm and firm, steady where mine were trembling. He lived for a day, I said. Just one. I named him Caleb. I paused, the name breaking through the silence like glass. I held him until he stopped breathing. Then I buried him in the corner. I wrapped him in what I had. I used a broken spoon to dig a shallow grave beneath the stone slab. I broke down. I let myself fall into the kind of cry I hadn't allowed in decades, one that came from the soul, not the throat. Helen pulled me to her, held me the way I once held her, rocked me the way I used to rock her to sleep when the world was still kind. I wanted to protect you from it, I sobbed, but I couldn't protect either of you. I was supposed to be your mother, and instead I became a memory no one trusted. She didn't say, "It's okay." She didn't lie to soften it. She just said, "I know you didn't leave me. I've always known." That's what broke me open completely, because somehow she did know. Maybe not the details, but the truth of me, the mother I had been, the woman I still was beneath the dirt and time. She told me she used to talk to me when she was little. I'd whisper to the floorboards, she said. Sometimes I thought I heard you whisper back. And in that moment, I didn't feel like a ghost anymore. I felt whole. That night, she told the investigators, she led them to the stone slab in the basement, the one I had marked with a single chalk X from an old box of supplies he had thrown down once. They found the remains, tiny, wrapped in old cloth, still faintly marked with dried flowers from the hem of my dress. DNA confirmed what I already knew. His name was added to the charges, not just for unlawful confinement and abuse, but for rape, murder by neglect, concealment of a corpse. The case shifted. What was once a story of disappearance became something darker, something unspoken in polite circles, but it needed to be spoken, because silence was how he got away with it for so long. Helen became my voice. She spoke at press conferences. She read pieces of the diary aloud to the court. She stood beside the lawyer and stared down the man who once held her hand at church, the man who built a prison beneath his own home. I watched it all unfold from a protected room with a window just big enough to let in light. I watched her grow into the woman I had hoped she'd be, strong, clear-eyed, unafraid of the truth. She didn't just save me, she restored me. And for the first time in decades, I began to believe that survival wasn't just about breathing. It was about being heard. The courthouse smelled like old wood and cold stone. It was the first time I had stepped into a public place since my rescue. The sunlight through the tall windows painted everything in gold, but I couldn't feel its warmth. I was wrapped in a soft gray shawl, one Helen had knit herself, every stitch tight with purpose, like she was trying to armor me. They offered to let me testify by video. I refused. I wanted him to see me, not the woman he locked away, not the trembling girl from decades ago. Me, Margaret, the woman he tried to erase, standing in the place where truth was supposed to matter. When they led me into the courtroom, heads turned, cameras clicked, pens froze mid-sentence. He was already sitting there, clean-shaven, straight-backed, dressed in a suit as if this was just another business meeting. He didn't flinch when he saw me, but I watched his jaw tighten, just barely, and I knew, for the first time in his life, he wasn't in control. The prosecutor read the charges: kidnapping, aggravated assault, sexual abuse, neglect leading to death, fraud, false reporting, emotional torture, concealment of a corpse, deprivation of liberty. Each word rang out like a bell. He showed no emotion. When they asked me to take the stand, the room shifted. Everyone leaned in. Reporters poised their pens. The air thickened. I took the oath with a hand that no longer shook. I looked directly at him, and I began. I was 24 when he locked me away. I was a mother, a wife, a human being. I told them about the stairs, the bucket, the food bowls, the cold, the diary, the pregnancy, the child, the death. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I spoke clearly, slowly. Each word carried the weight of the years I'd spent underground. I begged him, I said. I begged for help, for mercy, for a single ounce of human decency. He answered with silence. That silence became a cage. Helen sat in the front row. Her eyes never left mine. Her strength held me upright. I didn't die in that basement, I said, but he tried to make sure I never lived again. He never looked at me, not once, but I saw his lawyer squirm. I saw the jury hold their breath. I saw the judge's fingers twitch against the bench. After I stepped down, they brought in the diary, page by page, my handwriting, frail, erratic, shown on a projector. My words read aloud. I miss the sound of my daughter breathing. He says I'm crazy, but I remember the truth. He won't break me. I am still me. I am still real. I watched the faces in that room change. It wasn't just a case anymore. It was me. And suddenly, I was no longer invisible. The defense tried to call it mental illness, said I was delusional, that I chose isolation, that I suffered from postpartum psychosis, and Henry had no choice but to restrain me for safety. The jury didn't believe it. How could they? When a woman writes her child's name 100 times on scraps of trash and sings lullabies into the concrete, it isn't madness. It's motherhood, and no amount of polished lies could disguise that truth. Helen testified next. She was brilliant. She told them how she'd grown up with half a mother, how she had been fed stories of abandonment, of betrayal, how something in her never believed them. She spoke of finding the diary, of recognizing my handwriting from an old birthday card, of the cold chill in her spine when she realized the brick had moved slightly, as if calling her. I didn't rescue her, she said to the courtroom. She rescued herself. I just followed her words. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, not even mine. When the verdict came in, it was swift, guilty, on every count, life in prison, no parole. They led him away in cuffs. He didn't struggle. He didn't shout. He just walked, his shoulders slightly hunched for the first time, as if the truth, my truth, finally bent him. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like air, like I could finally breathe for the first time in years without tasting dust. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I didn't speak to them. I didn't need to. Helen did, and she said something I'll never forget. My mother didn't vanish. She was buried alive in a house full of lies, but she clawed her way out with ink and memory, and now she's free. The cameras caught it. The whole world heard it, but more importantly, he heard it, and I knew that was enough. After the trial, the world quieted again, not in the way it had in the basement. That kind of silence is hollow, devouring. This silence was different. It felt earned. Like the closing of a book, the last page exhaled before sleep. I didn't go back to the house. They asked if I wanted to see it, maybe retrieve some belongings, maybe reclaim the space. I said no. That house wasn't mine anymore. If it ever had been, it was just a cage with walls painted like a home. Helen understood. She moved me into her small guest room at first. She had a garden, a wide window facing the sun, and a kitchen filled with music. Not always words. Sometimes just soft instruments playing from a little radio she kept above the sink. The first time I stood barefoot in her kitchen, she offered me a cup of tea, then paused. "You don't have to answer," she said gently, "but do you want me to call you Mom again?" I couldn't speak for a long time, and then I just nodded, and she smiled through the tears. "Okay," she whispered. "Hi, Mom." We didn't talk about the basement every day. We didn't need to. We found other things. We built new habits, watering the plants, watching the birds, taking slow walks through the neighborhood. I tried to learn how to live outside again, but the past has a way of visiting, not as a ghost, not to haunt, but as a reminder. One morning, I was folding laundry when I noticed something fall from a pillowcase, a small folded piece of lined paper. At first I panicked, thinking it was one of the basement pages I hadn't hidden well enough that somehow it had followed me here. But when I opened it, I saw it wasn't my handwriting. It was Helen's. "When I was 7," it read, "I used to sit by the heating vent and talk to you. I didn't tell anyone. I thought I'd get in trouble. But sometimes I heard something back. Maybe it was my imagination, but it always made me feel less alone. I cried. Because in some invisible, unexplainable way, we had always been connected, even through floorboards, through time, through lies. One afternoon, we sat in the garden with a box of old family photos. She asked me to go through them, to tell her who everyone was, a simple task. But to me, it felt like breathing life into ghosts. I pointed out my mother, my sister, the dog we had when I was a girl. I told her about a picnic in 1957 when I dropped a pie in the river and cried for an hour. She laughed, really laughed. "Tell me more," she said. So I did. I told her about my favorite book as a child, about the boy who gave me my first kiss behind the school, about the song I wanted played at my wedding but never got the chance to request. I told her about the version of me that existed before him. That's what healing looked like. Not forgetting, but remembering everything else. The world began to recognize me again in small, strange ways. A journalist sent me a letter asking for an interview. I said no. A woman mailed me a copy of her own diary, one she kept during a time her husband abused her and no one believed her. She thanked me for surviving. I cried reading every page. An artist sent me a painting. It was of a woman in a dark room, a sliver of light cutting across her face. The title was, "She Spoke Anyway." I hung it above my bed, because that's what I had done. That's what I would keep doing, speaking. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need a crowd. But I would never be silent again. Sometimes, Helen would ask me if I regretted surviving. If there were days, it would have been easier to let go. And the truth? Yes, there were days I wished the story had ended before the pain grew too heavy. But then I remember how it actually ended, with a knock on the basement door, with her voice singing a lullaby, with a girl who refused to forget a mother the world had erased. And I know the truth. I survived because she remembered me. I survived because even when I was buried, I kept writing. And in the end, the words made it out. I sit by the window most mornings now. The light hits the floor in stripes filtered through lace curtains Helen sewed herself. Outside, the garden is alive with color. Marigolds, lavender, a stubborn patch of daisies that refuses to be tamed. The wind moves gently through the leaves, like it's trying to whisper something I've forgotten but still long to hear. Sometimes I close my eyes and pretend I'm just any old woman enjoying her retirement, that I've lived a quiet, ordinary life full of birthdays and dinner parties and Sunday walks in the park, that the darkness never happened, that the years I lost weren't carved out of me like pieces of bone. But then I feel the weight of those memories settle against my spine. I carry them with me, not as wounds anymore, but as evidence, proof that I existed when no one believed I had. People ask what I remember most from those 2 years underground. The cold, the hunger, the silence. Number, it's the ache of being forgotten, the pain of knowing your life has become a rumor, a misfiled document, a bedtime story no one finishes. That was the worst part, until it wasn't, until Helen's voice filled the silence, until her hands held my pages, until she brought me back to the surface, not just physically, but fully, with love, with questions, with presence. We planted a tree together last year, a maple, small but strong. She let me choose the spot, a corner of the yard that gets the last light of day. We buried something beneath its roots, a box with a copy of my diary, Helen's letter, and a small cloth doll I'd made out of a kitchen towel in the basement, one I kept hidden all those years. I want something to remember, she said, and I told her the truth. We don't bury memories to forget them. We bury them to honor them. Helen is grown now, of course. She has a daughter of her own, my granddaughter, a bright-eyed child with wild curls and a laugh that cuts through gloom like sunlight on water. She calls me Nana. The first time she asked me where I came from, Helen hesitated, but I said, I came from a place where people sometimes disappear. And then I smiled. But I came back. I'm not bitter. Not anymore. What would be the point? Bitterness is a cage just like the one I lived in. I've done my time. I won't build another cell around myself made of anger and regret. Henry died in prison. They said it was his heart. Funny. I always thought he didn't have one. I didn't attend the funeral. Neither did Helen. No one did, as far as I know. There was no obituary, no ceremony. He was buried in a state lot, unnamed, unclaimed, just like he wanted me to be. But I survived him. I outlived the man who tried to make me vanish, and not just in years, in presence, because I am here, still speaking, still remembering, still being remembered. Sometimes I reread my old pages, the ones I wrote in the dark. They're stained now, faded, edges curled, but the words are still there, shaky, desperate, but full of something far stronger than I ever understood at the time. Faith, not in justice, not in rescue, but in memory, in truth, that it would matter one day, that someone would hear it, that someone would care, and someone did. Now I write every week, not in secret, not in fear. In journals Helen buys me with soft covers and thick pages. I fill them with stories, of my childhood, of things I've learned, of people I remember. I don't write for survival anymore. I write for legacy, for truth, for the girl in the floorboards who once sang to a ghost she hoped was her mother, for the woman who answered even if no one could hear. I know I won't live forever. I've made peace with that. But I don't fear disappearing anymore, because my story will remain, not just as headlines or court records or whispered family lore, but as love passed down, page by page, voice by voice. Helen once asked me, "What kept you alive, Mom? What made you hold on?" And I told her the only thing I knew for sure. I remembered who I was before he tried to erase me. And I remembered you. If you're listening to this, if you've made it this far, maybe you've lost something too. Maybe you've buried pain in silence the way I did. Maybe you think no one would believe your story if you told it. But let me say this. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. And your words, even the ones spoken in the dark, matter. They always did.